Aloha, namaste. This is Radha, and I'm here to talk about Mahashivaratri and our new moon in Aquarius, which is coming up this week. We have first our honoring of Shiva with this great night of Shiva. Maha means great, and Ratri means night. And so we're celebrating this period of time right before the new moon, which is actually a celebration every month. We could honor Shivaratri is this Chaturdasi Titi that happens right before our Amavasya, which is the new moon Titi. So this is the 14th lunar phase when the moon is starting to wane to dark. Every month, right? The moon is our mind, it's our emotions, and in the Hindu pantheon, it's Parvati. And she comes together with Shiva, who's consciousness, who's the sun. And again, every month this happens, right? Every month we have this new moon. And all of the Hindu holidays are reflected through these lunation cycles. So we see how come they happen when we understand the astrology, why they're happening this way, and why the story is this way. And so we have um, an opportunity to drop deeper into our consciousness at these periods. And the reason is because during new moon cycles, our mind is less activated in the world. We're actually more internalized. People who are born near a new moon might know this. They might notice about themselves. They're just less social beings. They're less out there in the world. They actually need quite a lot of alone time, and they're usually more inclined towards meditation. And so this particular month, we call it Mahashivaratri because it's happening at a period of time when the Earth's axis is said to be tilted in such a way where we have the most capacity to really connect to this higher state of consciousness. And of course, this is going to be for the Northern Hemisphere. And it has to do with sitting upright. If we fast, so we don't have a lot of things to digest in our belly, we focus our mind in that one pointed focus towards Shiva, towards consciousness, and we're sitting in this upright position, we are more able to access our own connection to source at this time in this month. And it's the Hindu month of Falguna. So this is the period of time every year that we have Mahashivaratri. And of course, millions of people converge upon this Prayag, this confluence of rivers in India. And there's four different locations that it occurs at in this Kumbh Mela celebration. It happens over a period of time, over like a month period of time. People will flock there, and on this night, it's going to be the most amount of people. I've been there myself for the one in Haridwar many years ago, and it's a lot of people, right? And so you really have to understand that while our mindset might be to go to a celebration for Mahashivaratri, we also want to recognize that it's actually an honoring of our capacity to be with ourselves, to be alone with ourselves in our own connection to source. So wherever we go, whether we're in Sangha or whether we're by ourselves, this is a night to stay up all night. This is a night to meditate and chant and pray and allow yourself to really connect to your relationship, your direct straw to consciousness. And of course, this is moving into a new moon. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can look at the actual dates here. In Hawaii, it's going to be on the 25th Mahashivaratri, which is, I believe, Tuesday. And then, of course, in India, it's a day later. So it's the 26th, the 27th. And this is the start, the 7:39 p.m. Here is when Chaturdasi Titi begins in Hawaii, and then it ends on the 26th at 5:25 p.m. Hawaii time, which is 7:25 p.m. in Pacific Standard Time. And then we're moving into our new moon. So we saw that at the beginning of Shivaratri, we're in this nakshatra of Shravana, which is still in Capricorn. This is to listen. So it's a really beautiful nakshatra for moving into this space. And every year it's not exactly the same nakshatras, right? It's happening in this month of Falgun, but it's going to be one of these nakshatras. So sometimes it might already be in Dhanista, which is where it ends up. At the end of Shivaratri, it ends up in Dhanista, which has to do with Shiva's drum, that repetition of his drum And then we move into our new moon, which is going to be in Satabishak, where the sun is already. And Shatabishak, and you can also see Mercury at this point has moved. So by the time the new moon comes, Mercury is going to cross into Pisces and start the rest of the landslide that is moving into Pisces coming up for our eclipses, which we'll talk about soon. So the sun and moon are in this star of the it's really of the night sky, Satabishak. It is Varuna's star, and Varuna is the dark sun. He is when the sun goes beneath the horizon and we can't see it anymore. He's often related to the waters. His wife Varuni is a goddess of the waters, and he is the god of the night with all the hundreds of stars as his eyes. And he sees what happens in the dark. He sees what happens in the darkness. And this can often be related to corruption in society because it's in the sign of Aquarius, which has to do with our worldly connections, our social structures, and the different entities that might hold power across the way in Leo are holding that power over a population, over a group of people. And Satabishak is protecting people. It's ruled by Rahu, and there's this suspicious nature to it where it can see the future, it can see what's happening, and it might sometimes be we might have an overly suspicious quality where we're seeing into everything and thinking about everything in its way of being corrupt. And of course, it's a really good time to also work with healing. The 100 healers is often how we see Satabishak represented. And so it has this quality of not only social healing, but also just physical healing and practice with medicine. It said if you are to gain an illness underneath this star, even 100 healers will not be able to cure it. And if you find the remedy or the cure for something under this star, then it has the power of 100 healers and will cure you. And so this is one of the things that we reflect upon in this new moon is how can we heal ourselves perhaps on an individual level, but really on this higher, wider social realm, this lens that Aquarius lends us to, which is, looking at the big picture and what are the ailments that we are collectively holding right now. And one of these things that really comes into light for me is the collective acceptance of untruth, right? We've sort of spent our entire time over the dark ages, so everyone who's alive now, their entire life, and many generations before us also, accepting being lied to by those in power. We have allowed ourselves, we could say, at this point, we might not think of it as being as allowing it because it happened such a long time ago that it's just become normal. But in all aspects of our society, we have ways in which we've just accepted something that we know is not true as truth. It's kind of like sticking a pin in something. If you've heard that expression, I'm going to stick a pin in that. I know that part's not really true, but let's just stick a pin in that. Or maybe you were in science class and they're like, we're going to study this thing in a vacuum as though all the other factors are not there, just so we can focus on this one isolated thing and pretend all those other factors are not there. Well, that's great if we're going to study something in a vacuum or we're going to stick a pin in it for a minute. But in our society, we've stuck these pins in there and they've been there for so long, we forgot we have a pin in something. We forgot there's a post-it note somewhere that says, oh, by the way, this is predicated on BS, or oh, by the way, there are 1,000 other factors involved here. And this isolated thing we're talking about is kind of irrelevant because of all those other factors actually change the reality we're talking about. It's one thing to bring that into a classroom in order for somebody to understand a concept. But if we don't go back to the place where we broaden ourselves to all the different understandings, then we're really doing ourselves a disservice. And this is one of the things that's happened to the point where we have a society that seems kind of dumbed down. Like we seem like a society that just, there's so many people that don't understand things. But even those who think they do understand things, even our educated people, have so many things they don't really understand or see because someone in power somewhere has pulled strings that have convinced them this is all they need to know. This is the little piece that you need to know. You don't need to understand all these other things. And so much of this corruption has to do with money, right? Most of it has to do with money. And the other part of it has to do with power. And the two could be intertwined at various points. So, where the power has been held. And Aquarius is all about decentralizing that power. This is the sign where we're like, actually, we don't want a few people to have all the power. We want everybody to be empowered. But how can everybody be empowered when everybody's not educated? And when what being educated means is actually more often than not being brainwashed or indoctrinated. It's not actually really advancing people's capacity to think for themselves and to understand the patterns and things that have been happening over the long period of time. So this is one of the ailments that we're dealing with in our society right now is it's not that someone else is dumb. And I just did a video on Mars and Gemini and how we can so quickly jump to these conclusions like that person's wrong and I'm right and that person's stupid might be something that we come to the conclusion about, when in fact it's that none of us actually have the full picture. Nobody's holding all the pieces to the puzzle. I used to imagine that when I was quite a bit younger, like pretty much a teenager to a child. I used to imagine the world as all of us holding these different puzzle pieces, and we only see our piece of it. But if we can get a glimpse of someone else's pieces of the puzzle, we start to have a bigger idea of what the full puzzle is a picture of. And so the more we can do that, the more we can share our puzzle pieces and be able to see a bigger scope of what's going on, the more we can borrow the eyes of Varuna, but maybe lose some of the suspicious aspect and really open our hearts to the fact, and this is, Venus in Pisces can really help us with this, like open our hearts to the fact that truly most of the other people walking around mean well. They're not trying to hurt you or anyone else. They just have a different understanding of what's going to bring us the best results. And this is one of the things that, some might say the powers that be have done to kind of control us against each other is pitting us as though we are enemies to one another, as opposed to power itself or the people holding the power itself. We're like, oh, it's easier to fight with our neighbor who has a different opinion than us than it is to look at, oh, well, actually, our neighbor and us are pretty much dealing with the same things. And we've been taught different reasons why it is the way it is. And so much of our system and really we can look at religion as a big part of this because religion had so much of a hold in how the medical system moved forward, in how the school systems moved forward, and how the court systems moved forward, and how our democracy got laid out in our country, in the United States, and then in other countries, how their different systems came about. The different churches and religions have had such a stronghold in how people have learned to understand the world. And most religions are predicated on a story of some sort that the beginning part is you believe this, and then from there everything else happens. And so we've entered into this world in a place where we were immediately told this is what we're to believe, and we're not to question it, right? And this isn't true of all spiritual practices or the tenets of all the spiritual practices. If you look at the heart of each of the major religions, you can see that at their base, that was not the case at all. That's not what the Sufis were talking about. That's not what the yogis were talking about. That's not what the pagans were doing. That's not what the Kabbalah is about. It's the religions that have formed from that have largely focused on belief. Believe this, don't question this. And that's the problem, because if from the get-go we've been told not to question something and to just believe, then from the get-go we've just immediately turned off a part of our brain and said, yeah, okay, we're not going to do that. And Aquarius is where we're opening to the future, right? We're looking at the future. How can we move forward in a more and I'm going to stop my share now because a long time with me on the screen there. how can we, learn how to share to share our picture side by side with the chart? How can we advance ourselves technologically in such ways that we are not just feeding that greater machine with what we're learning, but where we're actually moving outside of the boxes that have been created and living more fulfilled lives, our neighbors and us, the individual humans living better lives, as opposed to the people in power maintaining power and all of us just, spending more time on our computers or in our little cubicles, in our offices or on our phones or whatever else ways in which we've basically submitted to mind control. And so this is the big question at this time. And this is where we could really learn from our meditation, because the more time you spend in nature, the more time you spend meditating, the more time you spend away from your screens and your phone and your TV and the different ways in which your mind is inundated with information from the outside, the more you do become wise. You don't have to read a lot of tomes to become wise. You don't need to study pages and pages and pages and volumes in order to become wise. Wisdom is within all of us. And when we sit with that or observe the natural world and we spend less time participating in the play, we find actually that we know a lot more than we think we do. And the answers for healing, the remedy is within. And so this is what this new moon really invites us to do. It invites us to go deeper within. It invites us to listen. It invites us to create sounds and rhythms that allow us to connect beyond the noise of the outer world. And then it allows us to have these eyes to see what ails us on a bigger level than just ourselves. But we are all reflections, we're microcosms of the bigger. And so when we can see what ails us on a personal level, we can see how this ails everybody. Start with silence and meditation and tuning in, and we will be back for our eclipses very, very soon. Namaste and happy, blessed Mahashivaratri. Oh, and if you want to see how this new moon cycle is going to affect you personally, you can go to my patreon.com, Radha Home Astrology, and sign up for Cosmically Aligned. It's the tier where I offer weekly forecasts and I share what all the different transits are going to mean for your rising sign, based on your rising sign, what's happening to you in your world. And I'm going to do this for the new moon and for Mercury changing into Pisces. I just did it last week for Mars going direct. And as all the different grahas move into Pisces, we'll talk about each one of those as well. So we're also going to do a upcoming live discussion on the eclipses for all the 12 signs, where I use people's charts and we dive really deep on how these big eclipses that we're about to experience, that are the end of this huge cycle of Pisces and Virgo, are going to affect all of us. So I look forward to seeing you there if you want to join me. And if you like, comment, or share on this YouTube video, that always helps me out a lot. Thank you so much, and namaste.